policy notes legal services should be put up for bid every 3 years, and as our last bidding was in 2012, it was time for another such round. As such, the bidding packages were prepared. They were sent out to the 2 firms that participated in the last bidding session, and to make the general public aware of the bidding, we placed a notice in the paper. I believe it was either 3 or 5 days, so everyone had a fair chance to see that our business was up for bid. The bidding was specifically for general work to be performed by our board attorneys. This bidding was not for the independent hearing officer or for any other specific work similar to some of our specific healthcare work, maybe some of our employment work, things like that. It was our general overall board attorneys. In all, we received 2 bids for the work, and the lack of a large number of bids, it was not surprising considering that school law is a very specific and not very common specialty. 1 bid was from our incumbent, and the other was from a firm, Strang, Pattison, Renning, Lewis, and Lacey, that has branch offices in Madison and Green Bay and service offices in Milwaukee and Oshkosh. 1 firm that presented last time did not want to make a presentation this time. A 3-person committee of Dr. Schulte, Dr. Sperry, and myself listened to the presentations of both firms. They were strong, and the presentations were very solid, and as such, the committee had a very difficult time when discussing which to go for. But in the end, the committee selected our current incumbents, Nolan and Mowat, to be retained for the next 3 years. Factors such as lower cost, almost 30%, and familiarity, as our current attorneys have been with us for 10 years, led to the decision carrying to the incumbents. So we are bringing this recommendation to the board that Nolan and Mowat be selected to continue to be the board attorneys for the next 3 years.
I move approval of the recommendation.
Motion.
Second.
And the second. All those, let's vote. Oh, I'm sorry. Is there discussion? Please.
I'll abstain because they're a customer of mine as well. So just to be clear, I think they do a fantastic job. If I wouldn't abstain, I'd vote heavily for them. My question, however, is this is the board's attorney. So the board should have been part of that committee. As was discussed in the finance committee, I understand, President Murray, that you said no, and that's your prerogative. But there are people out there who would then accuse or suggest that the administration is, quote, handpicking the board's attorney. And so if I was president, they would really jump on me saying, why didn't you have, the board on there? I'm glad you're the president because they would view you differently than me from that light. But I think, again, it's a great choice, but I think it should have been board members on that committee just to clear up that misunderstanding that's out there sometimes in the community. So, for what it's worth.
Thank you. Anyone else? Everybody understand the motion?
I have a quick
Please.
The other law firm that you mentioned, do they have an office in Janesville or no?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, let's vote. That passes unanimously with Commissioner Sotoman abstaining. Thank you. Commissioner Myers, PPC Committee. You bet.
Okay, for PPC, we had a nice long meeting, about 3 hours. We discussed a lot of things. We discussed the student engagement survey, the employee survey, and the results that are going to be rolled out. We had a really incredible presentation from faculty about challenging behaviors, and they are going to be coming and presenting hopefully sometime, right, to the full board. We talked about that and made that sort of recommendation. I thought that would be a good idea. We also talked about parking fees for students that are traveling between high schools, and turning that into more of an administrative regulation. And coming up, We also talked about the 4,500 series of policies that are needed to go into the policy or to the handbook that were already part of our policy. So coming up, we're also going to be having a P4J presentation in the near future, and also in the future, a library media innovation team presentation. Maybe not in the next meeting, but coming up eventually. So that's it.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Just a quick addition. Thank you for the nice compliment about the panel discussion. I thought it went very well too. But that was taped and that is available for the whole board to see too. So we're certainly welcome to come back to the full board for that. But we did tape that and it is available for your viewage.
Thank you. Next item, finance.
Okay, Finance Committee, let's see, we did hold a meeting, we did do our thing. One of the big things we did was to move forward with the group and have a report on UNESCO, which is doing it, and with UNESCO, and I'm going to let Keith do that. And I think it's all him now.
Briefly, we had a firm named UNESCO come, and they had a meeting prior to the presentation with our maintenance manager and our head of custodians. It's in line with the energy plan that was set up 4 or 5 years ago, I think primarily spearheaded by Commissioner Ardrey. This is a firm that comes in, examines our school buildings, and brings to light certain items that we can do to be more energy efficient. Of course, there may be some cost to it. We will analyze those before we present or put those into any future capital equipment items. It's a firm similar to Focus on Energy. Focus on Energy was financed by the state, and their services went down quite a bit when their funding was cut because they made the waiting list extremely long to the point of where we just considered they weren't ever going to come back after they were here 4 or 5 years ago. They were going to look, I believe, at 5 buildings today, as a matter of fact, to begin their study and prepare some recommendations to us. It will take some time, of course, to do that, but we wanted to get started with part of our energy review as part of the overall energy plan.
Thank you, Keith. Let's take a look here. I think you just stay there. And that. Let's see. Okay. We're going to present. You do the presentation of the fiscal 2015-16 year-to-date financial summaries. I think we've covered that.
Yes.
That was
Okay. Then the next part is the review, discussion, and consider approval of fiscal 2015-16 capital improvements budget to the full board. And that
That's-
And that will be,
That'll be
I believe
number
the next items are all.
Those are
16,
all outside of it,
18,
okay.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see if there's anything else here. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, everything's outside of it now.
Okay.
So that's our report.
Thank you very much. Item number 15, consider approval of fiscal 15-16 capital improvement budget.
This was discussed at length at the Finance Committee meeting. I've brought the slide back up that I skipped or just skimmed over the first time. Capital improvements by themselves, as a reminder, the total requested this year was $1,603,000. The amount that was spent last year was $1,622,000. We already had $745,000 approved for the early work that we had to do, including the roofing and the parking lots. And it was the recommendation of the Finance Committee to bring it to the full board for approval of the $1,603,000, which still would result in a $19,000 savings from that which was spent in the year before.
So moved.
There's a motion to approve
Second.
and a second. Any discussion? Any discussion? Okay, let's vote. That passes unanimously. Number 16 from Finance as well.
We did a similar review of the IT capital budget. It was discussed in detail by the committee. At that time, the committee suggested that since the request for the capital budget was in excess of about $629,000 from what was spent from last year, in order to get some items going this year, to just recommend for now the $800,300 that was spent in the prior year, and any difference would be brought up at a later meeting once some of the other budget numbers were a little more etched in stone and the situation was closer to being finalized.
And I would move that for approval.
Is a motion?
Do you have that, Deb?
Need a second?
Second.
There's a second. Does everybody understand the motion? Can you,
The motion, well, or I guess a board member could say something. I'll just say the motion was to approve just $800,300 for now, with the option of bringing it back later for additional, depending on the circumstances of how the budget falls through in the next week or two.
When we discuss the entire budget.
anybody else have any discussion? What was the budget last year? 1450?
Last year's budget was $800,300.
Okay, so this keeps it
Correct.
level for now.
Right.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay, let's vote. That passes unanimously, thank you. Item number 17. Yes,
Can I make a general comment
yes,
on
well,
money, on money? I just want to compliment the Budget Committee. I mean, I looked at the tape, and it really helped me understand all the materials that were sent out, and I really appreciate the depth of the discussions you have. And it helps me save questions at this meeting, so.
thank you. Appreciate that. Number 17, naming school district facilities administrative regulation.
What I simply did is I took the board policy that's already been in existence, 7525, and put some information. Actually, Keith did the majority of this work, but put information with it so people can actually move forward on utilizing this policy. So we added the administrative reg, and with that reg comes a form that you'll see on page 4 that people can fill out as they're working through this process. The title of the form is missing an I in facilities still. But other than that, it delineates the type of facility to be named and a mechanism for payment to be generated if, for example, there is something that needs to be done to a floor or to a wall, that money would be raised, or there would be an explanation as to where that money would come from. And it is the board that approves this, but that there would be a mechanism too for a period of time. So we set it at 60 days, that there would be a response to the applicant so they would know whether or not they could move forward, or that we would move forward on that or not. So this is just a vehicle for people to utilize for, that wanted to name a part of a facility or a facility. Administrative regs actually aren't something that the board needs to vote on, but I thought this was important enough, and we've kind of fussed with this for a long enough time. It probably would be good for the board to vote.
Actually, is this a change to a reg? We do vote on regs only one time, right?
No, but it's not necessary to vote on regs. And no, there wasn't a reg before this, just the policy.
Would somebody make a motion to approve?
Move approval?
There's a second. Anyone want any discussion, understand the motion? Commissioner Sotoman?
So the reg 7525 is, right now, does not exist?
Point 1.
Point 1.
Right, we had the policy, but without really any steps for somebody to act on the policy.
Okay, now, it's my understanding that a committee might be involved if a request comes up. So for now, naming the archery wing Okay with you, Greg? The committee is going to be formed, is going to be looking at these requests, correct? It's made up of members of the community as well? And wasn't that part of our committee discussion, or is this just? I didn't see the-
Well, it can be brought forward by an individual person or a committee, a group.
I mean, I
to
thought a
nominate.
committee was going to be set up to decide on such items. Does Greg Ardrey meet the qualifications of honoring a building in his name that is now energy efficient, or whatever we choose to do? I thought that was going to be a committee decision made up of members of the community as well as board members,
It's by the
That-
vote of the majority of the board.
just the board only then. Wasn't that discussed during a committee at the, I missed the
Might have been
last
at
part of the
one
finance meeting, so I missed the last half of it, so. We thought here it didn't make sense.
At the last committee meeting that I presented this, I don't believe that was brought up.
Okay. So my question is 60 days enough time if we do have to do some research? Because if someone wants to name something from somebody who's been here 70 years ago, I'm not going to know anything about it. And I would rely on a committee that does some research in the community, and here's why we think we should honor Mr. Smith or Mr. Ardrey, whatever, and so forth, because I myself would know about those things, you know. And so for me to be deciding, should we name it after this person, I would feel unqualified without some input from some type of group versus simply the
Well-
people who was requesting it, saying, please do this because of this, and there might be another reason or other person is deserving or what have you, so.
The form goes to the business office.
Okay.
And it's the CFO that comes back and presents to the full board. So if there's information that you would want the business office to get, that's where it would come from, at this point anyway.
Commissioner?
And Commissioner Sotoman, we have to respond within 60 days? That response could be, we need additional information?
Oh, it doesn't mean yes or no.
No, it says in the reg that we need to respond within 60 days, which means we need to notify so they know what's going on.
Okay, I interpret response meaning an answer, yes or no.
Nope, not necessarily, not in this regulation. Because there are occasions where you'd have to find more information, so. Does that help?
I guess I still, again, I'll let the people give me their opinions, but I still like the idea of having an ad hoc committee put together that's for these kind of purposes, and, but I don't wanna add committee work, that's the last thing I wanna do, but yet, I would feel unqualified to make certain calls on that, because I wouldn't know the people from, you know, perhaps that are nominated.
But you could direct the CFO to find out the information. I guess you could direct him to set up a committee, if you wanted to.
Okay.
Some people will be well-known, some people might not be.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Everybody understand the motion, what we're doing here? Okay, let's vote. That passes unanimously. Oops, I lost my spot. Dr. Sperry, thank you. Update on teacher-pupil ratios.
Good evening. Well, the 2015 enrollment-driven staffing plan was approved by the Board of Education. As some of you do recall, it had an increase of roughly about $419,000 at the time, of which we had $195,000 that was allocated for contingencies, or in essence, 3 FTE at $65,000 per FTE. What we use that dollar amount for, those contingencies, are instructional support teachers and/or our aid additions. So it's all based on our teacher-pupil ratios. And at the elementary level, or at teacher-pupil ratios are K through 3, 1 to 25, 1 teacher to 25 students, 4 through 8 is 1 to 30, 9 through 12 is 1 to 32. So where are we at with regard to the additional use of any of our contingencies right now? At this particular date, we've used $54,000. What does that mean? We still have $140,000 left out of those contingencies. So Some of you that have been through this before are wondering how many hotspots we have. Hotspots are mainly at our elementary schools. Hotspots are where we are either at or above our TPR numbers, and we currently have 15 hotspots. So right away you think, are all 15 of those things going to materialize? We don't know, but we monitor this daily. Our office is looking at this on a regular basis. Currently we have Adams 5th grade at, they're over. So that is one area that we, after the third Friday count numbers are in, we will be looking at adding an FTE there if it stays the same. Right now there are 61 students with 2 sections, so it puts us at 1 to 30.5, so we're slightly over. But according to board policy, we would be adding a full-time teacher into that position. So what would that mean? Our ratio, if we did add a teacher in at Adams, grade 5, the enrollment's going to drop down to about 1 to 20.3, if you will. Let's see. I will be providing another update after the third Friday count. If for some reason we have many of these hotspots materialize and we would be exceeding the 195 contingency, I would be bringing that back to the board and giving a recommendation at that particular time. So that's the stance that we have up to this point with our enrollment driven.
I have a question, it's kind of in reverse almost, that let's say we have a school that their enrollment drops 100 count. Now I know it can be spread out throughout all the classes and may not have an impact, but today are we able to transfer teachers?
If we were to,
If that was an option, that's very hypothetical.
by this time, we would have transferred any teacher that was related to enrollment. From this point forward, we would not be looking at transferring any staff members. We've done that already. If the third Friday comes in and it's under what our enrollment-driven staffing plan was or the projection was, those teachers have all been issued a contract. So we would be satisfying that contract by keeping those individuals in their positions, but that TPR would, of course, be lowered.
But you could move a teacher from one place that now because of numbers only requires, let's say, 2 versus 3 for that grade and make them fill a hotspot. I think, is that what
Yes,
President Murray was asking?
Yes, we could do that.
that's exactly what I was asking.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
So,
It truly, I mean, that's going to be a judgment call because we will have parents that will say, I like the TPR, that teacher-pupil ratio, exactly where it's at. I don't want you pulling that teacher from my school. So generally, we're not going to move someone unless we're adding in. And so that's why if Adams right now, I wouldn't be looking at transferring an elementary teacher into that. We would be looking at hiring as we've done in the past practice.
okay, so we have 3 contingencies that we passed.
Yeah, we equate the 3 contingencies to the dollar amount of 195
Right.
for teachers and aides, yes.
So there are 15 potential places that we could have issues with. You call them hotspots.
Yes.
Of those, 1 right now, we're for sure over the number.
As of today, yes. Maybe tomorrow we look at that and it's at 60. All they need to do is have 1 student not be in that 5th grade. And then
Or a new family can move to town and we add a person in any of the hotspots.
well, but I have to say this, the hotspot doesn't necessarily mean that we're 1 student away.
Within a
We could be
couple.
2, 3, 4 students away from adding a full-time teacher. I'm simply saying right now, we have 1 grade level that we would be looking at adding a teacher, yes.
Now, 15 seems like a higher number than previous years. Is that, is that a number that's normal? That just seems higher than what I've heard in the years past.
I think that we've had as high as 19.
Okay,
Commissioner Ardrey's nodding his head. And we've had as low as 7, I believe. So it varies,
so for now, we're okay with the 3 we have in the budget,
yes.
but you're gonna come back to us if by chance we
Yes.
got it. Thank you.
And I have another question about TPR. Now, when we talk about teacher-pupil ratio, how do we factor in the demographic of the class itself? So at Adams is a grade, we're at like 30.5, right? So of that 30.5, do we really look at the makeup of each individual child in that classroom as it affects, classroom management, right? You understand what I'm saying? If there's special needs or gifted kids, wherever on that scale are part of that 30, does that factor in, or is it simply just head count?
Yeah, it's the number of students in there, but if there are students with disabilities, ELL, we would look at tapping into either our special ed department or adding an aide. So we have that. But if we're over our TPR, by board policy, we would be adding in a full-time teacher in there.
So really, TPR ratio is strictly a head count.
Mm-hmm.
And the other circumstances that I mentioned are dealt with aides, other support staff. Okay. Thank you.
In the area of special ed, I'm just curious, when we look at I know there's a TPR for that also, and it's kind of a piggyback to President Murray's question. As we look at that and we look at the contingency dollars that we have, do we use this pot of contingency dollars potentially in the special ed area, or is it strictly just the allocated money for special ed? So what I'm getting at, and we look at the mix of kids that have come in, and we may be numerically acceptable from that standpoint, but we could have a student that could be a one-to-one. We didn't necessarily want to do that, but if that's the case, then that is definitely a difference from a numerical piece. So I'm just curious, how do we handle that?
Yeah, in Dr. Kelly's area for special education, she has it separated with teachers that are special education, that's in the staffing plan, but then also special education aides are also in the staffing plan. So those would be addressed through her department.
And is that strictly based on numbers, not necessarily?
Yeah, she has some guidelines that DPI has for EBD students or SLD students and so forth.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you very much. Last item, summary of board requests. I have none.